a lot about Chronicles of Narnia, but I think I know we had talked about we're going to switch modes a little bit and start talking quite a bit and start talking more about Tolkien, which is another author that I know absolutely love the movies, and I know for the books are pretty good too. So I don't know, but so what are some of your favorite things about the movies?
Yeah. Well, as far as the books go, I have only read the third one. Only read Return of the King, and like I said, it's so crazy watching that movie, which is almost 3.5 hours long. The extended edition is even longer, and yet they can't even touch the final quarter of the book, or whatever the
80 pages, I think it was.
Yeah, a lot of the book. So, these are packed. Partly why it took Tolkien, 20 years or whatever to write the series, because they're so packed, they're so intricate. He took so much time with the linguistic details, the character details, descriptions of things. So he's just a really detail-oriented guy.
Yeah, because what is it? There's a sign in some like home. I remember going in some like home-cooked restaurants. Quality food takes time to prepare. What is it? Prepare. What Tolkien would say. Quality literature takes time to prepare.
Yeah, exactly. And he definitely prepared some quality literature. In fact, I mean, his trilogy is considered some of the great writing of the 20th century. So, and of course we come to Tolkien's work, at least we do, through Lewis and their friendship. And so, I think one of my favorite things about Tolkien is the meticulousness. Is he crafts not only great characters, but a great story. That's not always that easy to do. For instance, I've read 2 books back to back. One would be considered, my friend Tim would say it's literary fiction versus pop fiction. Literary fiction, the writing quality is just on a totally different level. The character development usually is on a totally different level. Pop fiction is usually driven hard by a really good plot. Like a really interesting, crazy plot. So I think you have Tolkien who, and oftentimes it's one or the other. It's like either tremendous writing or tremendous plot. Tolkien, I think, does both well. He has this plot that's just unbelievable, and the writing is of excellent quality. So you don't always get that.
Yeah. Well, I know I heard somebody talk about, like, so just an example, like the movie. The Jungle Book. They're like, the plot was boring, but the characters were fantastic, so it's really memorable. Everyone remembers the characters, but like, oh, what was the plot anyway? I don't remember. It's kind of like, but yeah, so it's very often like character driven, and there's some Disney movies that are probably insanely plot driven and less character driven. And then, you have in Lord of the Rings, especially, like you have the really good characters and then the amazing plot too, or maybe they're both amazing.
And I think there are really complicated characters. That's true to real life. Like, I don't like when you read a book and somebody is either completely angelic or completely evil to their core. Like those usually don't happen. You get some authors that they portray a character. I just read a book like this. They portray a character that is so unbelievably evil. There's not a scrap of anything redeemable in them.
And there are some of those characters in Rings.
Sure.
There's a lot of those characters.
There's a lot of them that are, under the control of Sauron, let's say the orcs, they're totally irredeemable. But then you get a guy like Wormtongue.
He could have been redeemed.
And he kind of is in the end of the third book. If you read it, you'll see how his character in the end eventually does see some of the evil that's going on. So,
and I haven't actually I haven't sat down and watched the whole extended editions of the movies, but I've seen like clips, and there is actually, they kind of do a little bit of because doesn't he in the book, doesn't he stab Saruman in the back or something like that?
Yeah, he eventually is the one who takes out Saruman. So.
And then in the movie that happens, but it actually happens at the Isengard Tower.
Oh, okay. They just kind of condense it.
Yes, and he's dead, and I think Grima Wormtongue ends up dying at that point too. I can't remember.
I can't remember either,
or so like so that's one scene in the extended, that has their merits or whatever. But
But yeah, I think I just like how Tolkien. There are a lot of characters that are more complex. They're not pure light and godliness and righteous whatever, and they're also not. So many of them, like Gollum, as we've said, just not pure evil, because that's usually not true either.
Yeah, I know. Like one character watching these with my parents. It's in the Return of the King that Faramir and Boromir's father is like basically gonna do a murder. It's gonna be a murder suicide, and does he get? I think does he set himself on fire? Or does he just accidentally get caught on fire when Gandalf is trying to stop it?
Yeah, that's how they portrayed it in the movie. I don't remember how it happens in the book.
Yeah, but he's running down and his robes are on fire. My mom's like, well, they should have told him to stop, drop, and roll or something, and then he ends up dying or whatever. And I said, the way these characters are, like some of them are just so evil, there's not a lot of hope for him. And I mean, he's by far, like, I think he's, I mean, except for like Sauron, which of course he's the baddest of the bad, but I think he's, I don't know, I think he's worse than Saruman in some ways, but that's me.
Yeah, he's his mind is gone, kind of, and he's so selfish. I don't know.
And that's like, takes favoring your sons to a whole new level too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's something else that maybe in the extended edition they're able to actually develop, but that storyline between Faramir and Éowyn never develops in the movie at all.
It's in the extended edition a little bit.
Yeah, but it is a really nice storyline in the book, because Faramir is kind of like Aragorn in many ways. Very honorable, great warrior, kind, lots of integrity, so all that kind of thing.
Isn't he made doesn't Aragorn give him control of a certain part of the kingdom, or how does that work?
Yeah, I can't remember. He might be some kind of military leader in the new kingdom.
But I know he has some kind of. But he had some kind of like. Well, at the coronation, you see they look like they're dressed up like court members or something like that, more so than other people.
Yeah, which is as it should be. He would be under his father as regent, the next in line to the throne.
I thought that was right because Boromir had died.
Although, they weren't really supposed to be there anyway. He's just kind of an overseer.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a scene in Fellowship. Yeah, because Boromir dies at the end of Fellowship. I know I was trying to explain to my parents trying to explain this complex dynamic to my parents, and I was trying to so I was trying to explain to my parents, and I kind of compared Boromir and Aragorn kind of becoming friends at one point. They're definitely become friends before Boromir dies. And I said, it's kind of like either David and Saul or David and Jonathan. Because, in some ways, except David, Saul actually was king at one point. Jonathan was next in line for the throne. But he still recognizes that, no, David is the one who's going to be king. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on that. But I was just kind of trying to find a way to compare it, like a relationship dynamic, not saying it's a mirror of it.
Yeah. I think you do have a Saul, Jonathan, David sort of thing going on there. Although, the friendship, of course, between Boromir and Aragorn never really develops. But, yeah, here's a guy who recognizes, here's the next true king. Whereas my dad is just this pathetic whatever.
Yeah.
Although Saul did have perfect right to the throne as the one picked of God,
Yeah, up until.
Unlike Boromir's dad.
Yeah.
Right, because he's just a
steward.
Yeah, he's not the rightful king.
And then he and his family had ruled for centuries at that point. It sounded like, because I don't think there had been a rightful king since Isildur too.
Yeah, that could be.
I know one thing, and I'm not even talking about. I know. He told me before we started I had to tone down my oh my goodness, Aragorn's so attractive. But I'm not even going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about his character.
I don't want to have to do an intervention. It's getting pretty bad.
His character arc or whatever. I think in some ways it's I think it's kind of my favorite I've ever seen and portrayed in a movie. And granted, I can't say I've seen in thousands of movies, but I just think it's so such a beautiful transformation, or whatever, how you see him transform from the first time we see him, he's literally hiding his face, he's cloaked in darkness. And then I think in the second movie you kind of see him start to step into okay, I'll be a military leader. And then in the third movie, I think one of my favorite lines in the whole trilogy, it's super simple, but when Elrond comes to him and says, shows him gives him the sword and says, put aside the ranger and become who you were born to be. And then that's when he kind of steps into, okay, I'm going to be a king or whatever. And then then the first time he actually admits it is in the Paths of the Dead.
Yeah.
When he says, I am Isildur's heir and you will suffer me, or you will follow me, or whatever. And I'm getting caught up in this watching it with my parents. I'm like, that's the first time he's ever admitted that.
Yeah.
Because
it's a slow burn. I mean, he comes to it slowly.
And then finally when he gives that rousing speech to his men before they're going to go defend for Frodo. Oh, and this is one scene that, in the extended, that definitely has its merit, where, they cut, he and Gandalf and, I think it's, the main part of the Fellowship, the crew rides up to the gates and he says, let the Lord of the Black Land come forth. And then they cut right to, like, the orcs coming out. But one scene that they cut there was the mouth of Sauron coming out. So it's this guy who has, like, this part of his face covered and he's got this really, really disgusting mouth or whatever. And he tells them that Frodo is dead because he had, how when Frodo had been captured, they'd taken, like, his mithril.
Yeah.
And Aragorn walks up to him, and Aragorn's riding up to him, and he's kind of giving him, like, this, I don't know, whatever look. And then, the one thing I think is interesting about this is, like, Sauron is very much like the satanic character, and his mouth is literally speaking lies or whatever, and he says, and he's like, oh, who is this? Isildur's heir. It takes more to be a king than a broken elvish blade or something. I don't know what it is. And then Aragorn just takes his sword and just slices the guy's head off, just quick or whatever. And then they go into this whole speech or whatever. But it's so interesting to see how he finally, how he transforms and his again, like, slow burn, like you said, and then of course his coronation and everything too.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like a person can get sucked further and further into evil and darkness, we as Christians are kind of pulled further and further, Lewis's phrase, further up, further in. That to me sort of is a reworking of just like Aragorn's life, preparing to be king, kind of reluctant, very reluctant maybe, which is, by the way, the exact way you should be if you're going to take power. But it's kind of, to me, it's like a Philippians 1:6 thing. It's God who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. Guess what? Even as he takes over authority of Gondor, of the realms of men, he still has a ways to go to become who you were meant to be. As Elrond says, like we all do. Like, just because I submit to Christ, bow to his lordship, give him rule of my life, or try to as much as I'm able, because that's really hard, for him to take control of your full mind, your mouth, your actions, your heart. So, to me that's a really great vision of what that kind of looks like. His movement through the 3 books toward the reality that, well, I guess I really am going to have to put on this mantle and this crown and lead these people. That is the will of God, which they never say God. But.
Yeah, and I think even like his, again, like I said, like how it's so, like his countenance, like I said, his demeanor, his countenance changes too. Like he just has, like, he's just this scruffy all over, whatever. And then and then at his coronation, you see him, whatever. Like he looks very different in a lot of ways too.
I appreciate that restraint right there. He looks so good at his coronation. Whoa! Be still. Be still, my heart.
Stop.
Anyway, no, yeah.
I'm kidding.
Good-looking, scruffy man. I mean,
well,
let's.
I would like to remind you and remind the audience that when we were watching the movies, you were the one that brought it up.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Well, because you said that's like the coolest movie character ever, and then I said, yeah, he's been blessed with good genes. I think that was the extent of our conversation.
Yeah.
And then
Wranglers.
What?
Just kidding.
Wranglers.
Blessed with good genes.
Nice.
Classic dad joke there. Anyway, so yeah, he has this he has this kind of steady progression in one direction. You know, what Eugene Peterson, the Message Bible translation guy, called well, actually, it comes from the philosopher Nietzsche, but he has this book that's on my desk right now, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. That's kind of Aragorn. What you have with other characters is a long decline in the wrong direction. Think of a person like Saruman. He wasn't always evil. He was at one time on the side of the good, and he just faded. You have a surprising guy like Wormtongue, who's evil. He's at some point, maybe he wasn't, but he's become evil, but in the very end, he does something so redeemable. And then you have Gollum, and I think we should get into this right now.
Yes, we have to.
Gollum is such a unique character because he starts off as Smeagol, probably a pretty average, okay dude. The ring, the greed over the ring, greed over this thing, you know, I mean, that's a beautiful picture of what idolatry can do to a person. Or what?
Well, I was going to say, and we can get into more of this later, but I think, yeah, like this, I don't know, like maybe the ring, like I said, I was trying to figure out what it represents. I think like sin, because we can be like, my precious, this is mine.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think it can just represent, sin, anything that pulls our heart away from Christ. So, yeah, I think the word idolatry works. I think the word sin works. Things that, you know, for some it's power. For others, like Gollum, I don't know. I don't know exactly. He didn't seem to want the power of the ring. But this thing just got embedded, like, this is my little pet. My little thing, you know, and right, we all have our pet sins that we sort of feed and water and, you know.
We all have our precious.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I think Gollum, you know, he's corrupted by this thing more and more and more and more throughout time, and we see the physical decline mirroring the soul decline, the spiritual decline. In our own lives, we don't usually see it that obviously, unless maybe our precious is, you know, meth or something that would actually kill your body too. But oftentimes it's not something we can see physically in a person. But, you know, Gollum, he still retains this, you know, I mean, it comes out in him as a split personality. He still retains some of this Smeagolness, some of the humanity, some of the goodness, you know, that was in him at one time.
Well,
or whatever.
Well, I know, I think one of the more powerful moments in the trilogy is, I think Gandalf had told Frodo that he was once a hobbit, like not that different from a hobbit, or tells him who he really was.
Yeah, maybe he wasn't a man, but anyway.
Yeah, he was like some kind of creature. Hobbit-like. And I don't know, and they had when they first find Gollum, or when Gollum first finds them, he's just like, my dad said, he's being like a spoiled little kid because he's just screaming and he's throwing a temper tantrum or whatever. And I think they're in the Dead Marshes or something, and he's gonna do something, and Frodo reaches out and grabs him and says, Smeagol, wasn't that your name once? Isn't that what they used to call you? I don't know what the whole, and you just see that almost like does something.
Yeah, the light goes on.
The light goes on, like,
yeah.
I could be. And that changes his perception toward Frodo, and he actually tries to change.
Yeah.
Like, he has that whole scene where he's like, basically trying to tell his demon to go away. And I mean, I think that's such a picture of like how we can try to deal with something ourselves, and it's not going to go well. Because we can say, I'm not going to be mad anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Right.
But if we don't have God's help, it's not going to work.
Right. He doesn't have the power to change. So, yeah, he's just such an interesting character, and I love little vignettes in the movies where, you know, you get Gandalf in the cave saying to Frodo in the Fellowship, do not be too quick to mete out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. And then you see those reflective eyes of Gollum's, which is just foreshadowing all the way to the end, where Gollum is going to be the one that actually gets it done, so to speak.
Yeah.
Gollum's going to be the one that...
By biting off Frodo's finger.
Yeah, by biting off his finger. And so I've said this to you, and I'll say it right here. Gollum to me is such a phenomenal working of Tolkien's in the book of how Romans 8:28 operates. And we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purposes. Is that Gollum? No, but let's say it's Frodo and Sam. Let's say they are trying to do what is going to, ultimately save the world, basically, save the earth as they know it. And that involves getting rid of this thing that has just been around for centuries, destroying. Always luring men and women and elves and dwarves and golems into overwhelming greed. The love of money is the root of all evil, or whatever. The love of my precious.
Yeah.
But without Gollum, without this more or less evil character sticking around to the end, and nobody would get their finger bit off and say, this was, well, Frodo might, but this was a great and powerful working of good by God. God is the only one who can take somebody as messed up as Gollum, doing something as evil as biting somebody's finger off or whatever, and the ultimate end is the good of those who love him, who are called, it's not the good of Gollum, I guess. Gollum sinks into the abyss, but for Frodo, for Sam, for everybody else in the books who's working for the good and the saving of the earth, Gollum is absolutely essential. So what are the things in our lives that we see as great evils that God is, because he is the only one who can orchestrate this kind of stuff, that he's using to bring about his purposes?
Well, I know I think about, I know we had the conversation about when I was in the school I was in for 2 years, and you just told me recently, you said, what disgusted me most about that whole situation was that, your leader was the one that was mocking you and making fun of you that made you, I agree with you, it disgusts me, but even though there were so many things about that situation that irritated me, and the amount of growth that happened because of that is, I think I'm a better person today, and I can relate to other people who didn't grow up exactly the way I did better, whatever. And I think that's just, it was so, as much as it was as awful as it was definitely a good thing. And I don't know, but yeah, and I know, so I was telling my boss or something about, we were going to watch the movies or whatever, and she had said, and I think I told her that Two Towers is your favorite, because she said she couldn't pick which one was her favorite, and she said, oh, I think that's my least favorite, which I think is for a lot of people. And I said, I liked it because I liked how you get more into the mindset of Gollum. I think Gollum plays the biggest role in that movie. And she said, well, Gollum's my least favorite character, so that doesn't make me love the movie. I'm like, well, actually, I don't like him, but I don't hate him.
He adds such a unique element to the story, and he is such an essential part of the story. So the Two Towers, there's the rise of evil, right? Kind of like, I think a lot of times in a trilogy, the second movie is the one where evil advances.
Yes.
And then the third one is where it's broken.
Yes.
And victory comes. So you have the rise of Saruman and the whole thing going on at Isengard. You have the rise of Gollum and his bizarre, you're starting to see his bizarre dual personality come out and the fight within. But again, how relatable is that?
I know, that's
how relatable, like that conversation he has with himself, where they're panning and they pan to one side and he's Gollum, and they pan to the other side
and they changes his face.
Yeah, and he's just evil in the one and no, he's just this simpleton in the other, and you feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Well, how often do I have the Gollum war, the Smeagol Gollum war going on in my own self? Paul talked about that hugely in Romans 7. Like, I do the things I don't want to do so often. Oh, what a wretched man. Who will save us from this life of sin and death? Thanks be to God. It is through Jesus Christ our Lord. So that's what Gollum didn't have. He didn't have the power of the Holy Spirit for transformation like we do. Thank God. Because I'm still, am I a work in progress?
Yeah. Well, I know one thing I was trying, because, I was watching this with my parents, and I was trying to explain things to them, and I told them, we can watch it, and if you have any questions, just, I think I understand it enough, so I can ask you. I can
Pause it.
Pause it, and I'll explain it to you. And I said, at one point, I don't think they'd asked, but they were kind of being like, you know, you have the contrast of Sam, who's usually this loving, believing character, just not liking Gollum, and then insisting on calling him Gollum, and then Frodo's the one calling him, no, Smeagol, come on, it's okay. And I said, do you understand what's going on? And my parents like, well, no, I don't really get it. I said, Gollum is what Frodo could have become, and Frodo sees that. So, I don't know, that's me, my interpretation of it. Gollum is what Frodo could have become if it wasn't for Sam.
I think Sam, Sam has the reaction that a Christian should have to sin, just kind of following you around.
Oh, okay.
That's my take on it.
Okay, true.
I think he has the sort of violent reaction to Gollum that I, as a Christian, am supposed to have towards sin lurking around in my life.
Okay.
Am I giving it place? Oh, he's the only one who knows how to get into Mordor. Well, I'm sure they could have found a way. Because eventually, yes, he leads them into Mordor, right into the lair of Shelob.
Yeah.
So, could they have found a different way and still made it to the mountain and done what they needed to do? Yeah, I think so. But Frodo wants to keep this little pet, sin on a leash. That's my kind of, that's my kind of look. No, you're not off. It's just
that's one thing I see.
A different way of looking at it. So I like that. Here's Sam. What does he say about Gollum at one point? He's a liar, Mr. Frodo, or whatever.
Oh.
And he just in his spirit, Sam is so attuned. He's like the Lucy sort of Tolkien's books. He's so attuned to the good. Why do I like the Two Towers best? Man, it has a lot to do with, I love the scene of Gandalf plunging down the hill in the light coming down, not only from the sun in the east, but Gandalf, the light, in his own way, coming down, smashing into the forces of evil.
Oh, you're talking about at Helm's Deep? At
Helm's Deep. I love the freeing of, as I've said several times to you, but the freeing of Theoden, king, from the grip of Wormtongue, the evil, the demonic voice, that you get the demonic voice in the head constantly. I love that, the exorcism of Theoden. And then the speech of Sam to Frodo. I wish none of this had happened. He says, I wish that we had never come here,
Yeah,
and Sam's rebuttal, like, man.
Yeah. And then
so do all who get put in places like this, in positions like this. But
and then I love that. And then I think it's just a little bit later they're having the conversation where Sam's like, I wonder if they'll tell stories about us someday. They'll talk about Mr. Frodo in the Ring or something, or Frodo in the Ring. Yeah. And then Sam just says, well, you forgot one character, Samwise the Brave.
Yeah.
And
Sam thinks he's joking.
Sam thinks he's joking. And he's like, no, Frodo would not have gotten far without Sam.
Yeah.
And I think...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's like I went through and... there's like these things you can do online where it's like a tier list and you have all the characters, you can put them, these are like my absolute favorite, and these are like just not as good, but I like them. And I went through and I was like, if I was going to rank them, I think, Aragorn is my favorite because, well, not just because of being a lord, so because he's a good character and I love his story. And I'm like, but it would be so hard for me to pick, is it Frodo or Sam? And I have to put them right next to each other because Sam, again, I mean, he's like the Lucy. He's the Christian that we all want to be. But we're not. But so often impossible. So it's not possible.
Right.
We're not.
Whereas for me, it's no question, Sam, easily. Like Frodo is very noble in his willingness to take this mantle, this burden on. But Sam is the one who just, exactly. Frodo wouldn't have gotten far without Sam.
Yeah.
And Sam's speech where he's just like, there is good in the world, and it's worth fighting for. And you know what? I feel that way right now. I see a lot of darkness. I see Middle Earth, quote unquote, being taken over more and more and more by the eye of Sauron. I see that power of darkness advancing. And are we going to put on the burden, the mantle of Sam and Frodo, of Aragorn, of whomever, Faramir, and the rest of them fighting for what is good and right and honorable and righteous and godly? Or are we just going to be like the Steward of Gondor? What is his name?
I can't. Denethor?
Yeah, maybe. That sounds
about
right.
Denethor or Denethor. It's like, it's super
Denethor, maybe.
I think they all ended in Earth.
Yeah, are we going to be like Denethor and just be like, well, I'm just going to burn it all to the ground because it's all over anyway. We're all going to lose and we're all going to die.
Yeah.
You know, or are we going to just recognize that, as John MacArthur said in a sermon I was listening to yesterday, newsflash, we don't win here on this earth. We're all going to die, for one thing. That's not exactly considered a win. We win on the bigger stage, the next stage, the eternal stage. That's where we win. This battleground, this battlefield, we'll lose here. We want to advance the kingdom, advance the light, advance the love of God as much as we possibly can here. But this is not the battleground of our victory. Which is true. You can go, oh, that's depressing. It's not that depressing. We win on the important battlefield, the eternal battlefield. Like, Jesus will be victorious someday, even on the earth, the physical, you know, dirt and trees and whatever earth. But that is not now. You know, will we live to see the second coming of Christ on a cloud? Behold, he comes riding on a cloud. That'd be cool. But who's to know?
Yeah, you never know.
You know, in the meantime, we do the Sam thing. There is good in the world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. So, yes.
I know another line I love that Sam says. Sam says some of the coolest lines.
Sam is amazing. He's
I love
just
Sam.
amazing.
Yeah. I think if I was going to go, I think arc-wise, yeah, because I had this, I told you, like, my boss and I were talking about it one time, and she was like, she said, and I said something about, I don't know, I said, something about not realizing, I mean, like, I don't know, watching Pirates of the Caribbean at the same time as watching Lord of the Rings around the same time, being like, oh, wow, Orlando Bloom is kind of cute or something like that, or whatever, talking about it. And she was like, yeah, and I said, I think part of it is that when, like, Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli are generally all on there together. Legolas and Gimli are not there by themselves very much, but there's their subplot about their, you know, their kill count, which is
the dumb fight,
which is hilarious. And I mean, he has some great lines too, but he is not really a scene stealer. You know, Aragorn takes the center stage. She said, well, I think Aragorn's more of a main character than Frodo in some ways like that in the movies. And I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see that. And I think honestly, I mean, as much as I like Frodo and think he's great, I think his arc, which he doesn't have a huge arc, is almost more tragic in a weird way. Because, maybe not because he's kind of like, I mean, not really, but I mean, he's very much like the martyr in some ways. He basically gives his life for this because he
never returns.
Never returns. He never becomes a saint.
Yeah.
And he goes from this just carefree, kind of childlike hobbit to just degrading, coming further and further and further and further. And he, again, would not have been able to do what he did without Sam. To me, Aragorn does the opposite. He goes from this no confidence in himself, degrading himself, thinking, well, man, degrading himself.
Yeah, this guy out on the frontier, the Wild West.
Yes, to finally becoming the king. And I'm like, so I kind of have to, I don't know. I know we had this conversation and you're kind of like, no, Sam's the main character, more so than.
I mean, if you were to press me on who are your favorite characters, it's, well, I can at least identify the three that are my favorite. I don't know if I would want to pick an order, but it's going to be Gandalf, Aragorn, and Sam. No question. Yeah. No question. They are just phenomenal characters. There are other peripheral people that I love, Theoden, Eowyn. But you know, the other two hobbits are just, you know.
I didn't like them until the third movie. I mean, I liked them.
They're
I didn't
fantastic.
think they were. I didn't think they were that great. Really honest. I didn't think they were the greatest characters until the third movie because they were basically there to make you laugh.
Yeah, they're the comic relief.
Yeah, and I mean, Gimli's a comic relief, but he doesn't. He's not there as much, and he has some stuff like he would fight, and he has some structure to his character. And as much as I like Pippin and Merry, I'm just like, oh my goodness. And then I really liked in the third movie, that's kind of, especially Pippin, kind of, well, for one thing, screwing up by touching the plantier and messing up, and then but really stepping into his own and becoming, and being, heroic and lighting the beacons, which is another great scene. Love that scene so much.
Yes, it was a great scene.
And
oh man, we were talking about something just a minute ago.
They were talking about Sam. I got distracted.
That I wanted to comment on. What was it?
Well, I know. I started saying I know Sam has some of my favorite lines in the
Oh,
trilogy. And
that's what it was. If I can interrupt.
Yeah, please.
With Frodo, you were talking about Frodo, never recovering. I just read a book, finished it last night in fact, called The Nightingale, pretty famous book from a few years ago, about these two sisters during World War II, French sisters, who both get involved in the French resistance to the Nazis. And one of them dies, and the other one doesn't. But the thought process that you could ever return to who you were after experiencing something like that.
Yeah.
The complete inability, the war, even for those who survived, there would have been a generation of people for whom it's not like you could have lived through France between 1939 and 1945 and just have been sort of untouched by the war. I'm sure there were towns that were less, the Nazis were less interested in, places where you were more squirreled away and whatever, but to think that you could have to do some of the things that you did, have to see some of the things you saw, have to compromise your morals some of the ways that some of these people had to in order to not only survive but to help people survive against this. The Nazis are such an interesting case study because they are like the orcs. They are pure. Some of them, it seemed, were pure evil. The Hitlers, the Goebbels, the SS officers, the Gestapo. But there are characters in this book too that are Germans that are. They're not. They're much more complex. They're more like Gollum. There's a fight within them. You can feel it. But for these French women, it's like to come out the other side of the war. It's just like Frodo. He just can't even. How am I supposed to return to the Shire and just act like life is, going to somehow get back to the way it was? It can't. I can never go back. I'm not that person anymore.
Well, he still had. Did he actually have the Morgul blade still in him, or did he have?
I don't know. I can't remember from the book, but he's got the physical scars to remind him. He's got the mental scars of what he endured carrying this unimaginable burden.
And Sam just wasn't affected in the same way.
Sam wasn't affected in the same way, but Frodo, he goes back to the Shire. He tries, sort of, but it just doesn't work. And like these characters in this book, so many of them, one of them is the father of these two girls, and he came back from World War I, never the same.
PTSD.
PTSD, and they try to remember him as he was, but he's just not that person anymore. He's dark, he's sour, he drinks, he doesn't seem to love them, he doesn't seem to care. And there's some redemption in his character at the end of the book, but this idea that there are some experiences that you go through and you come out the other side stronger, your character has deepened and grown, your hope in Christ, your ability to persevere, like you're talking about with with yourself, going through masters and stuff like that, being able to see how God shaped your character, melt me, mold me, fill me, use me, like I've been talking about on Sundays. But there are other experiences that are so devastating, so painful, so difficult, that yes, God can still use them for the good. But that'd be a little harder to see as a French citizen living through World War II, whatever.
Well, I know we talked about a little bit, like the song Scars, and I might share a little bit of like the scarring situation that I went through with Masters. I might even say, ironically, the person who introduced this song to me was scarring me.
Yeah.
And ironically. And I said, but I can genuinely say, I'm thankful for the scars. But to be thankful for the scars, you have to be able to say, Jesus, I'm thankful for your scars.
Right. And to see what was going on in the midst of that God was working all things together for the good. And, by the way, your relationship with that particular person has come a long way.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah.
Had it never, grown at all, had there never been any kind of,
repentance.
I feel like there was some sort of attempt at repentance. Maybe.
Attempt at change.
Yeah, attempt at change, and that's huge too, because there's something incredibly powerful about that. But anyway, yeah, I think Frodo is just kind of one of those. Yeah, he experiences PTSD, right?
So
he can't get back to life as usual, and so he decides, I can't be the Frodo that I was a year and a half ago or whatever.
Yeah, well, I know I was reading there was like a discussion group online or something, and someone had asked, so what are some of the Christian like elements that are in the movies? Because I don't really know. And I said, and it was like a online forum, and I responded immediately. And I said, oh, that's really, well, I think there's one scene, probably one of my favorite, again, I keep saying, oh, well, what is my favorite scenes in the trilogy? There's so many. I know one of my favorites in the first movie is, well, it starts out right in the prologue. When Isildur cuts off Sauron's hand and the ring falls, it said, the ring passed to Isildur, who had one chance to destroy evil forever. But he was corrupted. And then, I think it happens like halfway through the movie when Elrond and Gandalf are talking about it. And Gandalf is like, we must place our hope in men, as in Aragorn. He's our hope. He's our messiah in a lot of ways. And Elrond says, well, I think he has a certain level of faith in Aragorn, because I think, and he raised Aragorn a little bit. I think Aragorn was his foster son. I mean, because when Arathorn died, I think he was brought to the elves to be kept safe until it was time.
That could be. I'd have to go back and. Yeah.
I think I'm almost positive. And but Elrond says, I was there, Gandalf, 3,000 years ago, and he said I took Isildur to Mount Doom and said, cast it into the fire. And there's just this really powerful where Isildur says no, and then he just turns and walks away, and Elrond's Isildur, and he's yelling for him, and I just am like, oh my goodness. So often we have those people in our lives that are like, get rid of it, just cast it in the fire, be done with it, stop doing whatever you're doing, you need to stop. And we say no, because again, we all have our little pets. My precious. Right. We hold on to our precious because we like it, we want it, it feels good.
What was, so Pastor John had that mentor, Pastor Leandro.
Yeah.
Were you here when he spoke for Harvest Festival?
I mean, yeah, that was a long time.
Leandro Arlano. I remember him saying in that sermon, we sin because we like it. And that to me is like, that's so true. It is enticing, it's...
yeah, it's like, it's good.
We like it on some level, our flesh likes it.
Yeah.
Our spirit hates it. So it's, it's this fight all over again.
Well, I know, like, even, I know, it's like, we can know, like, no, this isn't a good, or even, like, again, I was shocked, I wasn't shocked, but my parents finally, my mom kind of was, like, ho-hum about the movies, whatever, but, we got to the final scene where Frodo and Sam are in Mount Doom. That was the part where she was like, throw it into the fire! Just throw it in! Just throw it in! And that was like, I mean, she was getting really, really caught up, and I'm like, I know, my heart is racing right now, and I know what's going to happen. And I don't know, I was not, like, I told my mom, I said, you got to see the ending, it's going to be so good. And she's like, I know how it's going to end. I was like, no, you don't. Just watch. Because when I watched it with you and Christy, I was not prepared for that whole, like, fight. And I was not prepared for that.
That's
and I was not prepared for Gollum to bite his finger out. That was something, like I'm done with the plot.
And then kind of dances his way off. I mean, in the movie they portray it that way anyway. Dances his way off the end.
And then,
slash.
And then, but one thing that someone had pointed out is interesting. When Gandalf comes with the eagles to get them, he brings 3 eagles. Like, I think there are 3 eagles because he never gave up hope. That Gollum, there's always that little bit of, he hangs on to that shred of hope, What is it, the line in his One New Worship song, if I'm not dead, you're not done?
Yeah, that's, never even thought about that.
Well, I wouldn't have noticed it if someone hadn't pointed it out.
Yeah, he never gives up hope on, And I mean, some kid last night at Rangers, we were talking about salvation. This is with like 5 and 6 year olds. And I can't remember what his question was, but we were talking about Jonah and getting second chances. He's like, basically, how many second chances do you get? I'm like, well, right up until the moment of your death, you have second chances. The kid, it's like a 6-year-old kid, brought up the thieves on the cross, and I'm like, exactly. I mean, here you have.
I think I found my kindred spirit.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would have done.
Yeah, here you have the thief on the cross.
I don't know if it was
right
part, but...
up to the 11th hour, 59th minute, 59th second, this guy's hanging next to Jesus, and he has a change of heart. Repentance comes. Jesus sees that. Today you'll be with me in paradise. So, you know, what has God done with you? Whatever. I think even, you know, whatever. Even in the afterlife, I don't know that we say that God is done with people, whatever that means, but what do we know? As long as you are drawing breath on this earth, there is hope for you. And yeah, that's a cool observation. That did not strike me.
Well, like, I wouldn't have noticed except
Seen the
that...
movies like 10 times. I've never thought about that.
Well, there was a picture on Pinterest or something like that, and someone said, look, and someone written underneath, like, oh, look, there's 3 eagles, or something. I don't know what I think so. I don't know. I would not have noticed if someone hadn't pointed it out. And after, there's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee
and
it.
you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah. There's something, I mean, that's a good thing in this situation, but there's some things that you want to unsee and you can't unsee.
Yeah. So, in the words of Chris Farley from ages ago, enough for today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to stop. But you know, there are other things to talk about, and I think we should maybe come back and chat about some of this stuff. One that I brought up, for instance, with what was his name? Dave Barnes. Who's the guy we talked to?
Yeah, I don't know.
David, yeah. Is this idea of eucatastrophe that Tolkien really develops in his works, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, because that's also very much a Christian theme. So anyway,
yeah,
but good stuff.
Yeah.